Hey everybody, welcome to the 99th edition of Drive Thru Review. And for the 99th edition, I have a review of 1989. This is a newest game from GMT Games, sort of a sequel to Twilight Struggle, which is currently the #1 ranked game on Board Game Geek. It takes place in Eastern Europe in 1989, sort of the fall of communism, fall of the wall, preceding the fall of the Soviet Union and their government. It's a card-driven game, 2 players. It's going to take you a solid 3 hours to play this. If you've played Twilight Struggle, then you're going to be right at home with this game. Now, this is sort of a smaller in scope game, obviously. Twilight Struggle is basically the whole planet from, I believe it was 45 to 1988-89. And this is just 1 year with a small group of, Eastern Bloc countries. Now, it has that sort of same feel of sort of the puppet master kind of pulling the strings behind the scenes, but it's got sort of a boots on the ground, a grassroots sort of feel to it, and it's taken most of the mechanisms of Twilight Struggle to get that across, and sort of splashed in a little bit extra. If you've played We the People, or I believe Hannibal has a similar mechanic that they sort of stole, I guess. Kind of. It's different. So let me show you how it works. And like I said, if you played Twilight Struggle, you'll be like, well, this is the same game. A lot of similarities, but there's some differences. So let me show you all of that, and then I'll come back and tell you what I think. Okay, here's sort of a zoomed out level of all the components that you're going to get. You've got this very large, nice mounted map. And I said earlier, it's Eastern Bloc countries. You've got Eastern Europe up here sort of to the north, but you've also got some of the Balkan states down here to the south. And the idea is that you're going to be either the communist player or the democratic player, and trying to exert your influence, get countries to basically fall from the communist side to become democratic, obviously, if you're the democratic player. Now, all this is going to be done through card play, playing cards for either operations points or the events. You get tons of these influence markers here to place out on these different areas on the board, which represent all kinds of things from locations to sort of ideologies. So like you've got Hungarian writers there, not really a place, more of a sort of a concept. So as the game evolves from the first turn until the last turn, which is going to be either the 10th turn or possibly earlier if there's an early victory, the game is going to sort of evolve from sort of this area here to extend up into Eastern Germany and then down these Balkan states and Romania finally at the end. So the focus of the battles, quote unquote, is going to kind of spread through this whole map as the game evolves. So you can see at the top of the map we've got a turn track here, and then we've got an action round track here. And it starts off red, the communist always goes first, and then you'll flip that and the democratic side will go second. And each of these turns is going to be made up of 7 rounds. Now sometimes the communist player can play for an 8th card on their turn, but normally everybody plays 7. Now at the start of the game, you're going to deal cards out of this early year deck here. And when you hit turn 4, you're going to shuffle in the middle year deck. And then finally at turn 8, you're going to shuffle in the late year deck. So players are going to be dealt each turn a hand of 8 cards. They're only going to play 7 of them normally, and possibly holding a card for the next round. Now you got a couple things to look at on this card. You can see up here in the upper left hand corner is the op points, also in a colored star. So the stars are going to be either blue, silver, which is sort of neutral, or red for the communists. Now you can play these cards for effectively their operations points or for the event on the card. Now the thing to keep in mind is all of the red star cards are going to have events that favor the communist, whereas the blue star cards will favor the Democrat. Now if I was the Soviet player, or the communist player I should say, and I had a nice hand of nice blue cards, well, that doesn't do me a whole lot of good. Because if I were to play one of these cards here for the ops points, which I can do, then this event here is automatically going to trigger for my opponent. So I'm going to need to be very careful. And this is really the crux of this game, as well as Twilight Struggle. Also Labyrinth has this. And so really the heart of the game is knowing when to play these cards so that maybe the event isn't really that bad for you, or maybe not bad at all for you. And sort of timing these cards and learning all the cards as the game evolves from early to mid to late year, and playing them in the most optimal time. So if you play a card for ops points, There's a couple things that you can do which I'll show you. And if you play the card for the event, obviously you just basically read the text of the event and then execute whatever it says. So I should say that the game comes with two of these nice player aids that basically tell you all you need to know about the game. Now, while the game's cards are very complex and can cause quite a bit of brain burn, the actual steps and the process of the game is actually very simple. The rules are probably around 10 pages. There's a ton of play examples and things like that supplement the rules, but everything you need to know is basically right here on this player aid. So the first and most simple thing that you're going to do with these ops points is to place support. Now, to start the game, players will have support in certain areas of the game. So you can see in Krakow here, the Democratic player will have one support point in this area here. And there's a few other areas labeled like this in the game that players will start with support. And then after setup, then each player will take turns placing support in different areas wherever they choose. And that's actually outlined very nicely here. First, Communist places 2 support, Democrat 3, and so on. And I should say the board is really very helpful in sort of reminding you of what all the different things are. So if I were the Democrat player, I could play this for ops points and try to place support. Now, the rules for placing support is I need to either have support already in the country or have a country adjacent to another country that already has support. So if I played this for 3, I could place 3 support either here, 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 or here, anywhere adjacent to this spot. Now what I might do, I could place some support here and some here, but let's say for argument's sake, I want to place support here for 3. Now you can see I've got 2 sides to this marker. I've got a white side and a blue side. Now I use the blue side to indicate that I have control of this space. And the way that you know that you have control is you look at this number here, and that's the stability number. And basically you need this much more support than your opponent to have control. Right now the Communist player doesn't have any support, and I've got 3. So I've got control, so I'll flip that to the blue side to show that. And obviously if the Communist player came in here and put a support in, then I'd have to flip that over to show that I don't have support, and I could put another one in there to move this to 4. Now I've got 3 greater than them. However, if you're going to place support in an area that is controlled by the other player, it's actually going to cost you 2 support points out of the card that you played to get your first support in there. So in this case, the Democrat is that place controlled, and I've only got 1. So my first or next point is going to actually cost me 2 of these 3 points. So I'll use 2 of the 3 to move this to 2, and now he no longer has control because he doesn't have 3 more than me. Then my next support point is only going to cost me 1 because he no longer has control. Now the next thing you can do with these op points is to do a support check. And each player comes with a die in their color. And the way that you do a support check is you'll play the card, and you get to do 2 support checks in 2 different countries, no matter where it is. It doesn't have to be adjacent to anything at all. It's sort of like a sneak attack. If you played Twilight Struggle, this is sort of like combining a coup with a support check. I forget what they call it. But it's basically one big mechanic here. So if I'm going to do support check, I play this. I can pick 2 countries. Let's say I was the Communist player for argument's sake here. And I'm going to choose here. Well, I'm going to take the value of this card, which is 3, and then I'm going to roll a die. So I'll roll a red die here. So I've got 4. Well, that's not going to work because you're going to compare this value with whatever your die roll was to twice this number. So in this case, 6. So that's not going to do any good. Now if I had rolled, let's say, a 6 here, that would have given me 9. So you take 9 minus this number, which is 6, because it's always double, and that means I've gotten 3 points. I've netted 3 points. So I'm going to reduce my opponent first by 3 points. So that'll take him down to 1. So let's put that at a 1. So you can do a nice drastic swing there. Now if I had done enough, let's say I wanted to do it a second time. Let's say I do it again and I got really lucky and I rolled a 6, because you can choose the same country twice with your 2 support checks. So again, that's a net of 3, so that will remove 1, and the other 2 left over will go to increase my side. So I'll move that up to a 4, and then that'll give me control of that. So support checks are a little bit random, a little bit, sort of a gamble, but they can be quite effective and quite deadly. And they can also be a waste of a turn, so you've got to be careful with that. Now, one other thing to keep in mind with the support checks is you need to look for any adjacent locations that are under control of either you or your opponent. So again, let's say I'm the Communist. I'm going to play this card for its ops. I'm going to try to do a support check here. Now I take 3 plus whatever die roll, compared that to 6 here. But I'm also going to modify my die roll plus this number based on how many controlling adjacent locations there are. So any adjacent locations that I have control over are going to add 1 to my number. Any that my opponent controls is going to subtract 1. So in this case it would be a wash because he's controlling that, I'm controlling that, so it's a wash. But if this didn't happen, I would take 3 plus 1 plus my die roll and then execute the effects. So finally, you can play the cards for the events themselves, and remember, if let's say I was a Democrat player, if I played this for the ops points, then this is going to trigger for the communist player. So basically, every card is unique in this game. There's no duplicate event card or anything like that here. So 100% of your game is going to be learning when these cards come up. Do they come up early year, mid-year, late year? You know, what kind of bearing do they have in the game? How good the cards are in certain times, things like that. I'm not going to go over really any of these, but there's just a ton of them, and it makes for fun. It's nice thematic, you know, a little flavor text. The pictures on there are great, and it's very educational. And the game comes with these notes on every single card to give you sort of a historical background, and I find that quite nice. You know, just if you're curious about a card, you can look it up while your opponent's thinking about what he's going to do for his turn. Now there is one way, once per turn, that a player can basically sort of discard one of their cards in the opposing player's color. Now they don't have to be their opposing player's color, but if I want to get rid of this, it's very deadly. I don't want to play this card at all because you basically got to play through all of your cards minus 1. So you're going to be forced to play these cards. You've got to work around. So you maybe take the deadliest card to you and play it here against the Tiananmen Square track once per turn. So if I was a Democratic player, I'd play this. I'd get 3. I'd roll a die. So I've got 4 here. So that means I would actually fail. So this is my track here as the Democrat, and the communist would be here. What you're trying to do is beat this number here to move up the Tiananmen Square track. And this is sort of a loose, you know, very loose mechanical sort of thematic tie-in to, you know, bring in the whole, you know, China and the revolt there in the Tiananmen Square. But as you move up this track, if you're the first person to hit one of these places here, you're going to get the benefit. There's several benefits here, and these are very key, so it's also a good idea to move up this every turn if you can. Now, in some of these cases, like for example, this one says +1 modifier for all Tiananmen Square rolls. Whoever's there first gets that, but if the other guy catches up, then it goes away. You don't have it anymore. Some of these are one-time uses, so the first one to get that will execute the effect, and then the next guy that hits it doesn't get the effect. So it's a good idea to lead here as well. And some of these can be very key. They're not huge game swinging, but if you use them at the right time, they can be very effective for you. So let's zoom in on one of these countries here, and they're all color-coded for you to look at easily. And what you're going to try to do is control this country so that when a scoring card is played that matches this country, you have the most control, are able to score points for it. Now here's an example of a Hungary scoring card, and this is an early year card. And it gives you a list here on the side of the board of when the scoring is going to happen. So Hungary and Poland are going to get scored at the beginning of the game, and then probably throughout the game, because the scoring cards will most likely get shuffled back into the deck. And then you've got the middle year countries and the late year countries. So what happens when you're dealt a scoring card is you have to play this. You cannot hold this through the round. You've got to play this. So if you get dealt this, you're going to know that you're going to need to score this, but you're not going to want to be too obvious about that, you know, going and placing all of your influence in there right away, because your opponent's going to know, oh, he must have the scoring card, so I need to combat him as much as I can. So when a scoring card is played, we're going to take a look and see who controls what countries here. So let me set that up real quick. So you can see I've set up a sort of fictional situation here. The communist controls 4 of these areas, and the Democratic player controls 5 of these areas. Now if you look, you can see the background here in the text here. This is orange, and then these are sort of a multicolored background. The ones with a multicolored background are very important. These are considered battleground states. And you want to control these usually before you want to control any of the others. And the other thing to notice is, in addition to the stability number, each of these places has a symbol on it. And you can see in the top of the board here, there's a legend. So anything with these hammers are worker spaces, these sickles are farm spaces. You've got churches, elite spaces, student spaces, bureaucratic spaces, intellectual spaces, and so on. So as you play the game, you're going to need to know what the different types of spaces are and how some of these cards, and especially the events of the cards, are going to interact with those. Now there are certain types of spaces that will favor the communists, like these elite spaces are sort of like, you know, the communist strongholds. And the student spaces and the intellectual spaces are sort of the liberal, democratic sort of, you know, intelligentsia, for lack of a better word. And they're going to kind of favor them. So what's going to happen when you play a scoring card is players are going to be dealt cards from this power struggle deck. And this is separate from the event deck. And you can see we've got different suited cards here. We've got Rally in the Square, which are these triangles, marches, different numerical values. There's leader cards. There's wild cards. There's a whole mess of cards in here. Now you're going to be dealt cards equal to the number of places that you control to an extent. So the first place that you control is going to give you 6 cards, and then 2 cards for each additional space. So the communists would get 6, 8, 10, 12 cards. Democrat would get 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 cards. So they have a little bit of an advantage there. In addition, any space that you control a symbol of, you will be able to use a leader of that type. So in this case, if the Democratic player was dealt an intellectual leader, then this would be legal to use in this little combat that we're about to have because he controls an intellectual space. However, if he had a worker leader, he doesn't control any worker spaces. The communist player does, but if the Democrat had this card, it would basically be a dead card in their hand. So whoever played the scoring card is going to start off with initiative, and then we're going to have sort of what's called a power struggle, a little battle. So what's going to happen in the battle is the player that has initiative is going to start. So in this case, the Democrat, he's going to play a card. So let's say he wants to play a strike. He'll play a strike with a value 3. Now the communist player has to play a matching suit. Doesn't matter the value. It has to play a strike or a wild card. And here you've got a wild card with the W. Or he can play a leader that he's able to play. Remember now, in this case, he'll have to control the worker space, at least one worker space. And then he can play that leader card. So let's say he plays the leader. He doesn't have any strike cards. He plays the leader. Now as the defender, he's going to roll a die. And he has to match or equal this number that the Democrat plays. So you roll a die. He got a 3. So great. Now he has the initiative. Now he's going to lead off the next round. So he may play a march here. And the Democrat may play a march, and then he's going to roll his die, and then he got the initiative because he beat the 3, or he got equal to the 3. Now, I don't want to go too much more into this because I could get really involved and mired in this. Suffice it to say, you want to try to get spaces with sort of these different symbols so you can get access to different leaders, but also balance that with the fact that you want to have control of these battleground spaces. Now, there's some other cards in here with different effects and things like that on sort of the outcome of this power struggle. So if you take a look at this card as one example, +2 support loss and victory point die rolls. So if you win the game with, or win the power struggle with this, it's going to modify the outcome. So let's take a look at what happens after you've played the scoring card, had your power struggle, what's the outcome of that. So the first thing you're going to do is, let's say the Democrat won. He's going to roll the die twice. He'll roll it once, so you got a 4. So this means there's going to be a support loss of 2. Now the Soviet player, or excuse me, the communist player, can go and remove 2 support from the country anywhere they want. Now in this case they're lucky because they have some support in an area of a country that they don't control. So they could remove 2 support here without losing control of any of these countries. If this didn't exist, then he'd have to remove support from somewhere that he controlled. So he'd lose control of maybe one of these battleground states, or even this space here. So the power struggle is going to affect how we end up scoring this country here. Then the player's going to roll a die here, and he's going to get this many victory points. He rolled a 3, he's going to get 1 victory point. Now, if the Democrat player wins, and he rolls a 4 or higher, then we're going to remove this card from the game. Otherwise, it's going to go back into the game unless the communist player chooses to remove it from the game. Now, if the communist player had won, he would do the same thing. He would roll a die. Democrat player would take some support loss, and then a victory point bonus would be awarded to the communist. But in addition to that, the communist player is going to score basically for power. And what that means is if we look at some of the numbers here, we can see there's presence, domination, control, and there's also power. So this says power 1 times the number of times this card has been scored. So the first time in, the communist player is going to put a 1 there, and he's basically going to get 1 point for this. Now some of these other countries are more valuable, like Poland is 3 times the number of cards played. So when this comes through again, if the communist player wins, he's going to get 2 times that. So in the case of Poland, it would be 6 points, which is quite a bit. Now, if the communist player chooses to remove this or the Democrat rolls a 4 or higher, we're going to put a little Democrat marker here to show that the communist player no longer has control of this country. And the communist player will get a bonus for each country that they still control at the end of the game, but more on that later. So the next thing you're going to do here is check for presence, domination, control, and then the number of battleground states. And you're going to combine all that with the power of if the communist player scored for power. So how does that work? Well, if you have presence, it just means you control one of the areas in this country. So you'll get a point. Well, in this case, each player controls a country or an area in this country, so that's a wash. Next is domination. Now, domination happens when you control more total areas and more battleground states. So in this case, let's say the communist player had that, they would get a bonus of 2 points there. Finally, we have control. Control is if you control more spaces and all of the battleground states. So you're going to add up all of these, and you're going to get +1 for each battleground. So the communists will get a +3, and then -1 for the Democratic one. So you total all those up, and then take the difference, and then you move the victory point marker based on whoever had the net gain. So at the start of the game, the victory point marker starts here in the middle. Whenever the communist gains points, it's going to move down this way. The Democrat gains points, it's going to move up this way. Now at the end of the game, you're going to do a final scoring of all the countries, and whoever has the points on either side is going to win. But it's possible that one of the players will get the points all the way up to 20 on either end. In that case, you'll have an instant victory. In addition, the communist is going to get a bonus of number of countries that they control. They're going to just get flat out a number of points. So at the end of the game, you're going to combine all of this, and then whoever has the most is going to win. There's also what we like to call the Hasselhoff card, which can have a sinking feeling for one of the players. I'm not going to go through the effects of this, but the game can end sort of prematurely when this is played on the turn that this is played. Finally, there's a Soviet Union stability track here, and each of these spaces is just a keyed off at certain events. So first few of the events are going to be positive for the Democratic player, and then this last event, the coup of the Kremlin, finally is positive for the communist player. And you'll just use this little marker here to watch for that. And I should say there are some other event tokens that will happen. So when you play certain cards, there may be lasting events or things you need to keep track of when other cards in later years come into play, and these are here to help you remind you of that. Alright, so that was the overview. I think you can tell I like this game. I'm a fan of Twilight Struggle. I like Labyrinth, even though that game gives me a giant headache. I don't know why. This game is probably a little lighter than Twilight Struggle. Not a whole lot lighter. I don't know. They kind of feel the same. After playing this a few times now, they feel about the same weight, I think. So, now this takes out some of the, like there's no DEFCON track. There's no required military operations if you played Twilight Struggle. Which is missing. I mean, but there's no reason to have that here, because the whole idea of that is the whole build-up of, you know, the arms race. There's no arms race in Eastern Europe at this time. So you kind of miss that kind of thing, but they have this power struggle deck, which is a totally different mechanic, but it's symbolizing sort of the swing in the mentality of the people and the different leaders in the different areas, you know, and the different conceptual, you know, things like the universities and the newspaper writers and the elite communists versus, you know, the bureaucrats and things like that. And so you've got to sort of control these different areas on the board, but also these different ideologies and these different sort of, you know, work types, the different types of people. You've got workers and farmers and things like that. So that when it comes time to score, play the power struggle cards, you've got a better chance of having effective leaders that you can sort of play as wild cards and help yourself not get strung up, because as soon as you can't play a card, you lose. And that loss may have a detrimental impact on what countries, or not countries, but what areas you control in the game and swing the scoring cards. The other thing that's really interesting is how you can remove the scoring cards if you're the communist. So you maybe let somebody have East Germany, let's say, and it's not going to get scored again until the end of the game. But now you can focus your efforts on maybe some other places, like Poland is a big place that's going to be scored probably a couple times in the game. So you can kind of set them up to let them have East Germany and then know that, okay, when Poland comes up, I'm going to dominate the heck out of that place. The other thing to keep in mind is that's going to take a few plays at least to get into is the sequence of events and as they come out. So you've got some events in the early year that will have ramifications again in the later year. But you're not going to know that going into the game unless you somehow magically studied all 110 cards. But the first time you see that happen, you're like, holy cow, you know, if I had known that, I wouldn't have just let the Democrat have that university space or that church space or whatever. I would have gone after it. Even though it may seem like a lot of work, because later on, it's going to hammer the heck out of you. Because if one event happens, it will trigger maybe other events from being allowed to be played. Whereas if the event doesn't happen, then it's not going to be played and it won't be as bad for you. So you're going to kind of learn sort of the history and sort of the correlations and the cause and effect of the different cards and how they happen. And I think that's why I'm kind of enjoying this maybe a little bit more, because it's a more focused type of history. And I'm kind of learning a little bit about it, and at real surface level at this point, to be honest. But as I play this game more, I'm going to learn a lot more about these different events, where I was just kind of, you know, watching the news. I think it was 12, 13 or something when this happened. And, you know, I just kind of got, oh, cool, the wall fell. That's nice. You know, it didn't affect my little teenage life there. But you kind of get into the mindset of, you know, the uprising or these guys trying to hold on to power as it slips through their fingers. And then finally, to enhance that whole thing of them, you know, losing a grip on these countries, the events at the early part sort of favor the communists and then kind of swing towards the Democrats. So that arc is really fun. You know, it's something, I really like this game. I really like these types of games where you have, they're war games, but they're not really. They're sort of these ideological struggles. And you're able to sort of take the role of, you know, either side and kind of invest yourself in the history and sort of invest yourself in maybe the mentality and sort of get into sort of the subtleties of the mentality, because after all, these people are human beings. So, you know, nobody is these absolute black and white caricatures. So I really like that these games sort of do that, where as opposed to, you know, like a battle in World War II or something, which also has its place. So anyway, I probably talk way too much, but I enjoy the game. I enjoy talking about this kind of game, and I would highly recommend anybody go and check this out. I don't care who you are, if you're a Eurogamer or whatever, or like to play tic-tac-toe or something, go ahead and check this out. This is a great one, maybe 1960s, a little bit lighter, I would guess. But this is good. It's easily accessible if you can invest yourself in the time to learn the cards, get into the feel of it. It's great. Great experience. Thanks.